The year is 1764, and a merchant vessel off the coast of Boston is dealing with a rather peculiar problem.
What the f*** is this?
A new tax has been introduced by the British Parliament, the Sugar Act, taxing all foreign molasses and clamping down on smuggling. And to this new law, every single American merchant said,
Says who? Says the bigwigs across the sea. I guess that war they've been waging is quite expensive.
Apparently, Great Britain is quite broke. The 7 Years' War has drained their coffers, and so naturally, this great empire looked to their citizens to help pay the debt. A reasonable request. Britain did spend vast swaths of resources defending their various territories, including America. But despite this, the American colonists responded exactly how you'd imagine, saying,
Well, if you're gonna search the ship, best you start right over there. What's in that barrel? Molasses? It's empty! Not anymore, it's not.
The American colonists pushed back against the Sugar Act. They harassed tax collectors, they'd bribe tax collectors, and they created organized organizations of resistance. All very effective strategies. And the result? Great Britain repealed the Sugar Act. Not good for Parliament, as they appeared very weak against their colonial subjects. And that was unacceptable. So in due time, the legislature got together and thought long and thought hard about how best they could overcome this issue of state debt, while also reminding these dirty colonists who was in charge. As the leader of Parliament said,
Damn it! There must be another way to extract wealth from these peasants.
To which the other members replied,
Taxes?
As they passed the Stamp Act, taxing all goods requiring a stamp, letters, brochures, pamphlets, and more. However, this tax took the colonists from frustrated to downright revolutionary, as they began to fervently oppose British rule. They boycotted British goods, they boycotted British people, and they harassed anyone loyal to the crown. But the tax wasn't the only issue. It was the lack of representation in British Parliament, and as a result, the slogan, "No taxation without representation," became widely popular. And this is a big deal, for it directly challenged British Parliament's authority, which once again proved incapable of enforcing their legislature, as they would repeal the Stamp Act and give in to the colonists' whims. But Parliament was furious, as their power was being questioned. But how could they adjust? How could they control these damn colonists? And finally, one member of Parliament would get creative and really think outside the box, saying,
Taxes?
As Parliament decided to try a new strategy. Taxes, but this time the Parliament would take it a step further by using the tax to pay the local governors in the colonies. Now, why is this important? Well, it essentially attempted to shift control of the governorship away from the colonists and towards Great Britain, as they would have superior influence. And besides that, these new taxes were perhaps the most extensive and exploitative yet. They taxed everything. Lead, glass, paper, tea, you name it. They were gonna tax it.
Congratulations, Miss Smith. It's a beautiful baby girl. That will be 18 pence, please.
The Townshend Acts were the final straw, the one that broke the camel's back. For once again, the colonists would mobilize and organize, employing all their same tactics. And it works. Britain relents and repeals the Townshend Acts, yielding to their colonial subjects, to which the colonists said,
Yeah! F*** England! And the king! Woo!
As they celebrated and celebrated, drinking that untaxed wine, playing those untaxed cards, and smoking that untaxed opium. They were loud, so loud that their cries echoed all across the land, even across the sea, where one King George sat upon his iron throne and said,
Kill them all.
As he sent multiple divisions of British troops to Boston, the epicenter of the American Rebellion. But this infusion of troops into an already unstable environment would prove tragic, for the British soldiers did not get along with the colonists. Both sides despised the other and looked at them with disdain. Tensions grew and grew until one day the powder keg would blow.
Hey, British scum! You forgot to pay your bill. Like those taxes you forgot to pay? Take that bill and shove it up your arse. You can't speak to me that way. I'm white and a man that owns property. Aye, you are white and a man to be true. But your soul is that of a colonist dog, a coward who fled the motherland. And for that crime, there can only be one punishment. My 34 shillings?
The British soldier strikes down a civilian with the butt of his musket. It's very effective. Too effective, for from the commotion came a crowd of colonists, and they are none too pleased. They begin haranguing the British soldier, hurling insults, levying challenges, and even throwing snowballs.
Take this, British scum! Ugh.
When suddenly, a fell silence fell upon the crowd as the bells began to toll and toll, and with it came more people and more soldiers, and in mere moments it was a full standoff. On one side, the British, and the other, the colonists, who said,
You suck! Eat this!
The crowd gets even more hostile and even more dangerous, and out of desperation or fear, the British soldiers cocked their weapons and did the unthinkable. The British fire into the crowd. It was a massacre. The Boston Massacre, and quite possibly the worst thing possible for Great Britain. For from this, American fervor would only grow, meaning more protests, more organized opposition, and more disdain for the crown. So what did Britain do?
Taxes?
They levied more taxes, or rather, focused their taxes by giving certain advantages to British tea companies, as they hoped to create a monopoly within the American colonies. Not fair, and the colonial response would be as predictable as ever.
We're gonna do what? You see that tea? We're gonna take it and dump it in the river. Why would we do that? We're British. Tea runs through our veins. Well, if you love British tea so much, then drink it.
A group called the Sons of Liberty target a tea trading vessel in the port of Boston. They do a little dress up, do a little vandalism, and dump all that tea into the harbor. And that was Britain's last straw. Murderous mobs were one thing, tax evasion another, but wasting tea? That was a crime King George could not forgive, and so Parliament introduced the Intolerable Acts, putting Massachusetts under more direct control of the Crown. They sent over more soldiers, shut down the harbor, and installed their people into powerful positions. The goal? Make an example out of Massachusetts. Scare the other colonies into submission by saying, hey, this could be you too if you don't behave. And that went about as well as you'd expect, as the other colonies began to mobilize and organize, sending delegates from each of the colonies to Philadelphia, where they met at the First Continental Congress to decide their next steps.
We should attack Great Britain directly. No, we should attack Canada. We should plunder Georgia. They didn't even show up. Fools! You think too small. Plundering Georgia peaches would be fruitful, but I have a much better plan. I don't even know what that means. We must rally the militias.
The First Continental Congress decided to activate the militias. The treason was a go, and King George was furious. He wanted these rebels put down, and fast. So the British sent out a group of soldiers to seize the militia's weapons stationed at Concord. But through the heroics of one Paul Revere and others, the militias were notified of the British approach, and thus were able to meet them in the field at Lexington. But they're outnumbered, and the British pushed the militia back to Concord. But the further the British moved in, the more perilous their campaign became. For the other militias from around the country began to rally and regroup to their cause, blasting the British back and back, all the way to Boston, where they would begin to lay siege. It was exactly what the rebels needed, proof that they could hold their own. And with a bit of leverage, the colonies wrote up a document, an olive branch, a petition requesting one last chance at creating peace. But King George would hear none of it, as he replied,
"You can take that branch and shove it up your ass."
And so it was war. America versus England. And the first action would come from the north, where one Benedict Arnold went to Congress with an idea. Fort Ticonderoga, the greatest fort in North America and a critical hub of communication. It's a brilliant plan. However, Arnold isn't the only one to think of it.
Hey guys, you know what would be crazy? If we took that fort.
For Ethan Allen and his Green Mountain Boys also plan on taking the fort. And so Arnold meets them, and the two sides begin to plan.
Alright, so the fort can be scaled here, here, and here. Now most of the citadel should be asleep. So I, Benedict Arnold, shall lead you Green Mountain Boys over the wall and into the fort. Got it? That is a fantastic plan. But there's one huge problem. I, Ethan Allen, will be leading the Green Mountain Boys. Not you. What? But I've been appointed by Congress. I have the authority. But that is where you are wrong. For you have a piece of paper, but I have the men's respect. For example, gents, take a walk. Apparently we aren't needed here. Wait. All right. You win. But can I at least have second in command?
Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen both wished to lead the assault on Ticonderoga, but the Green Mountain Boys will listen to Ethan Allen and Ethan Allen alone. And so Arnold, despite his shame, is demoted. Now from here, the party would travel towards Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain. It's late and dark, and all the world seems asleep. But not the Green Mountain Boys. They crept by tree and slid by stone, pressing towards the fort. They scaled the walls and opened the doors, and then they were in.
Good morning. Good morning? Good night.
Arnold, Allen, and the Green Mountain Boys take the fort in fantastically simple fashion, not even firing a single bullet. A huge victory that was about to become even huger.
My God. That's a lot of balls.
For the fort contained a massive cache of artillery, yet this massive W for America would become a major slight for Arnold. You see, Ethan Allen wrote to the Continental Congress and told them of the capturing of Fort Ticonderoga, including all the juicy details about him and his Green Mountain Boys. Yet he left out any word of Benedict Arnold, a major slight to the very proud man. But this was still a major victory for America. The colonies were not just surviving, but actually thriving. And so the Continental Congress met again with the goal of further refining their revolutionary purposes. They wanted to do away with the mindless militias and rather create a reliable standing army. But to have an army, you need a leader. And so the Continental Congress got together the resumes of their brightest minds and began to examine the candidates, saying,
Benedict Arnold? No, too short. John Adams? Too smart. What about Charles Lee? Too stupid. Damn it! Why does this have to be so difficult? Hello, gentlemen. God damn it, it's Washington again. What do you want, George? I'd like to be considered for the position. And your credentials? I single-handedly started the 7 Years' War. I ousted the French from Ohio. And I've chopped down like 61 cherry trees. I feel like you made literally all those things up. But you do look good in that military garb, even if it smells. So, you're hired.
George Washington would be elected to lead the Continental Army, a ragtag group of various militias from around the country. They are undisciplined and very smelly, but time is of the essence, for the British are currently held up in Boston. But their patience wouldn't last, as the British pushed the colonists stationed at Breed's Hill. 2 waves of British soldiers were sent, and 2 waves of British soldiers failed. But on the 3rd push, disaster strikes for America. Their munitions run out, and the Americans are forced to flee. It's a British victory, but a Pyrrhic victory, as many Brits died pushing the hill. And for now, they would retreat to Boston and wait for reinforcements, while Washington and the Continental Army bided their time.
Are you sure, Benedict? Canada is as cold as Ethan Allen's heart. Dick, I'm as sure as I'll ever be. Montreal is mine.
Benedict Arnold and one Richard Montgomery decide to launch a 2-pronged attack towards Canada, one through Montreal and one towards Quebec City. But poor mapping and harsh winter conditions batter Benedict Arnold's army, And at the Battle of Quebec City, the combined American forces are thoroughly crushed. Richard Montgomery dies, and Benedict Arnold is injured, being forced to flee back to Fort Ticonderoga. But this was not the fort he left, for Benedict Arnold would find that Ticonderoga had been ransacked, saying,
My God, where are all my balls?
The artillery guns were gone, taken by Henry Knox and brought down to George Washington to aid in his siege of Boston. And by placing these big guns on certain strategic points around the city, the British were exposed, and thus the British were forced to completely abandon Boston, sailing thousands of troops off the Atlantic coast to await their next landing. Another win for the colonies, and as the war dragged on and the colonists proved very capable, whispers of a new idea began to emerge. People no longer spoke of tax reform, but rather full-fledged independence. Even amongst the Continental Congress, the idea of independence began to bloom. And so they put one Thomas Jefferson on the job to create a manifesto of man's rights, a declaration of their independence. And so Jefferson burrowed himself away for many nights until finally the idea came to him.
Where to begin? God? Is that you?
Yes, Thomas.
Yes, it is I, Thomas. Write down these words and free thy people.
Speak them, my lord, and I shall write them down. All men are created equal? Inalienable rights? Are you sure? My God. You are crazy.
Now from here, Thomas Jefferson would create the Declaration of Independence. And once finished, he sat back and said to himself,
I've done it. I've written the most perfect document in human history. Literally, all men are created equal. It's so obvious. Now I just need to get one of my slaves to send this off, and we'll be good to go.
And that is exactly how the Declaration of Independence came to be. And when King George saw it, he said,
All men are created equal. Inalienable rights? My God, these colonists are crazier than I thought.
And it was official. America would no longer be a vassal of Britain. She would be her own sovereign nation and do as she pleased. But to accomplish that, the war must be won. And back on the front, George Washington moved to New York City. For after ousting the British from Boston, he expects them to land in New York. And he's right, for the British have moved on Staten Island. But this time with real muscle, moving tens of thousands of men slowly onto the island. And once amassed, they simply moved across the river and engaged Washington's men. And although it seemed to be an even fight, the British were able to buckle the American line by using a simple flank maneuver. This forced Washington and his men to flee. And flee. Until they simply couldn't flee anymore.
Oh no!
For they had reached a river, the East River, and they were trapped. On one side, the British, and on the other, death. It was over. All the British had to do now was push the Americans and end this whole charade. However, British leadership have another plan.
What did you say? We should establish a base camp here and dig in for a siege. Sir, let's end this madness Lead our men home. Nay, Archibald. My horse is hungry, my stomach hurts, and I haven't pooped in like 3 weeks. So we shall siege. What did you say? The British have established an encampment just over the ridge. I believe they're digging in for a siege. A siege? Perhaps the British are dumber than I thought. Men? Take off your clothes. We're going swimming.
With Washington trapped on Brooklyn Heights, the British decide to dig in for a siege. But this is a critical error, for it gives Washington time to get all his men across the river. A huge victory amongst this defeat. But sadly for Washington, the defeats would continue, as the Americans would be chased and trampled by the British out of New York and all the way down to New Jersey, where they would set in for the winter. Both sides dug in. On one side, Washington, and on the other, the British. Well, not technically the British, but rather Hessians, soldiers loaned out to Britain by their European allies. They would hold Trenton on the other side of the river. Now, despite narrowly escaping the British, Washington still had a huge problem.
Shit! What is it, sir? Our men's contracts. They're about to be up. Can't we just force them to fight? No, they're white. And even worse, they own property.
Many of his soldiers' contracts would be up come the 1st of January. Desertion was already a problem, but once those contracts were up, all bets were off. So Washington created a plan, and fast. He would cross the river and attack the Hessian mercenaries despite the poor weather conditions. He would use multiple divisions, hitting multiple directions simultaneously. An ambitious plan, but very risky. And sure enough, as Washington moved out, a massive winter storm descended upon them. 2 of his divisions are forced back, but Washington, being the general, refused to be stopped. So he continued across the frozen Delaware River. Now, in Washington's ideal plan, they would waltz into Trenton and find the Hessians unprepared. Drunk and asleep they would be, assuming the Americans would never cross that river. But in reality, it seems the Hessians were somewhat aware of a possible attack, and so Washington and his 2 divisions were forced to fight the Hessians. But they win, capturing a huge cache of supplies, but more importantly, raising the troops' morale. It was a pivotal moment in the war, and after a few more skirmishes won by the Americans, the 2 sides dug in for the winter. But despite the victory at Trenton, Washington needed aid, and so one Benjamin Franklin left London and headed to Paris. The goal? Get the French directly involved in the war. But the French refuse, needing to see more concrete evidence of American prowess. So for now, they would aid the Americans more covertly, sending supplies to aid America, while Britain became ever more impatient with the lack of progress. And so they created a new strategy.
North? Why would we do that?
The British wished to perform a multi-pronged attack. 1 general from the west, 1 from the north, and 1 from the south. The goal is to cut the American line. A solid plan. But when General Howe, the one responsible for the southern campaign, had a different plan. He would take Philadelphia, the capital of the American Revolution. But this leaves General Burgoyne completely isolated in the north. Burgoyne, still believing Howe was coming, made the arduous trek south. First he took Fort Ticonderoga, and then continued down the all-important waterways. But after various blunders and failed military expeditions, Burgoyne's momentum came to a screeching halt. His supplies were weakening, and his men's morale was low. But it gets worse, for a large American force led by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold pressed down on Burgoyne. They'd been haranguing his men and now looked to make the killing blow. But there's a problem.
We should attack. No, we should not attack.
The two men can't agree on anything. One wishes to be aggressive, while the other pushes caution. But Benedict Arnold, being the ever-confident leader, disregards direct orders and assaults the British at Bemis Heights. He wins, which leads to Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga. And this is a big deal, for after Saratoga, the French now have seen enough. They have enough confidence to get more directly involved, mobilizing their army and preparing for war. Clearly, Benedict Arnold was a hero. Time and time again, he'd proven a great military leader, yet glory still evaded him. He'd been passed up for many promotions, and now Horatio Gates, a man desperate for glory, would go to the Continental Congress and take full credit for the Battle of Saratoga, saying,
So there I was, blasting the British at Freeman's Farm. I shot them with cannon and smacked them with musket, and all the redcoats fled before me. And when the smoke lifted, Saratoga was mine. Or at least that's how I remember it happening. That all seems quite believable. But what about that Benedict Arnold fellow? What became of him? Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold. Oh, the short fellow. He fled like a craven.
Horatio Gates lies about the Battle of Saratoga, and once again Benedict Arnold would be burned by his very own people. The betrayals began to mount, flittering like moths to a flame in his mind, and Arnold knew they could only be cured with one thing: revenge. Benedict Arnold would have his revenge. But for now we must return to George Washington, who is currently dug in at Valley Forge. After losing the Battle of Brandywine Creek and allowing Philadelphia to be taken, Washington and his men are hunkered down for the winter. But the conditions are rough. The men sleep in little huts, food is scarce, and discipline even scarcer. Desertion is about as common as bread, but that would all change with the arrival of one man.
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi? C'est soi?
Friedrich Steuben, a Prussian man sent by Benjamin Franklin to train the Continental Army. Steuben couldn't speak English, and his credentials were dubious, but it didn't matter, for Steuben spoke the universal language: pain, as he successfully whipped Washington's army back into shape. He taught them formations, shooting technique, and the mysteries of Prussia. And by the spring of 1778, Washington's army emerged far more capable than ever before. And with France becoming more involved in the war, Britain would now try to leave Philadelphia and consolidate their forces in New York. So George Washington devised a plan, grabbing one Charles Lee and saying to him,
Okay, so the British are currently moving from Philadelphia to New York.
Okay.
Now I want you to go and pursue them while I rally the rest of the army.
Okay.
Now this next part is critical. Under no circumstances, none, even if Satan himself shows up, should you retreat. Should you retreat. Should you retreat. Should you retreat. Sir! 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 The British are turning and fighting. What should we do? Retreat!
Despite Washington's orders, General Charles Lee refuses to engage the British. He flees from them and forces Washington to rally the troops himself, engaging the British at Monmouth courtyard on a hot and humid day. But it's a stalemate, and both sides back off. The main British force will hold up in New York, while Washington bides his time and looks to reorganize his forces. And this is where Benedict Arnold comes back into our story. For currently, he is serving as the governor of Philadelphia. Frustrated by his lack of upward movement and slighted by his fellow commanders, Arnold has become quite disgruntled. And after marrying a wealthy aristocrat with loyalist ties, Benedict Arnold began to communicate with British agents. And there, a new idea hatched in his mind. So he went to George Washington and requested a new position.
I want that.
West Point. The disgruntled Arnold would ask to manage West Point. Washington agrees, and Benedict Arnold immediately turns around and offers it to the British, who said,
Here you are, Benedict. 20,000 pounds and command of your very own army. Now, how will you deliver us West Point? Simple. I weaken their defenses, give you the signal, and West Point is yours. You want to do what? I'd like you to move these cannons to the kitchen. You want to do what? I'd like you to open up the gates. The breeze feels nice. You want us to do what? I'd like you to drink this.
Arnold prepared to deliver West Point to the British, sending out an emissary with the plans. However, the man is captured. Not good, but it gets even worse, for Arnold is literally right about to meet with George Washington for a review of West Point's defenses. Really not good. And so mere moments before the two men were destined to meet, Arnold did the only sensible thing. He got on his horse and sped away, leaving a puzzled George Washington to say,
Where in God's name is Benedict going? Sir, come quick. We've found a spy.
Arnold's treachery was revealed, and George Washington would never trust again. For it's 1779, and the war continues to grind on. The British had fired many commanders, and now one Henry Clinton led their men. So he looked at his map and found America's weak point, the South. Henry Clinton would target the South, as he believed with greater loyalist numbers the British could sweep through and end this war. So he sent one General Cornwallis to lead the charge while he held up in New York. They had taken Savannah and Charleston and looked to expand outwards, and it seemed as if their loyalist plot may work. But in reality, they underestimated the anti-British sentiment in the South, and as a result, militiamen began to crop up, utilizing guerrilla warfare to harass the British. So to root out these rebels, General Cornwallis engaged in classic anti-guerrilla tactics. He murdered lots of people, but oddly enough, this only turned more people against the British. And so to deal with the ruthless redcoats, the Continental Congress employed Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, down to face the British. But he loses, and when Nathaniel Greene would be given the Southern campaign. Now Greene understood something critical. The British were incredibly well supplied, and also incredibly well trained. So instead of just waltzing into battle with a less capable army, Nathaniel Greene did something genius yet unconventional. He split his army into two, and by doing this, he forced the British to also split their army in two. taking them on a wild goose chase across the open southern plains. One army, led by Daniel Morgan, defeated the British at Cowpens, and from here the agile American forces continued to evade the British, driving them deeper into American territory and stretching their supply lines. But finally, after days of hit-and-run tactics, the Americans and the British collided. And at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, the two armies finally hit. It's a bloody affair, and the British do force an American retreat, but it's a Pyrrhic victory. The British lose many men, and more importantly, it's far from the decisive victory the British need, with the French becoming more involved and slowly sending over troops, and British public opinion wearing, Parliament is quickly losing patience. They've replaced countless generals, yet miscommunication and selfish leadership continues to plague them. And by 1781, British resolve hangs by a thread. So General Cornwallis heads to Yorktown to await reinforcements. So George Washington, dealing with his own issues, wished to move swiftly against one of the two British positions, Yorktown or New York. Two options to attack, two options to win a decisive victory. So Washington thought long and hard until he realized what he must do.
We shall attack New York.
Washington wished to attack New York, to which his counsel said,
Sir, with all due respect, that's a pretty stupid idea.
So they decided on Yorktown. Here the French fleet could trap the British and obliterate them. But Washington didn't want the British to know where he intended to strike, and so he came up with a genius plan.
Hey! Hey, you! We're gonna kill you!
What is it, sir?
It's the Americans. It appears they tend to attack us, the fools. Send word to General Clinton at once.
Washington feinted movement on New York, and with lightning speed headed to Yorktown. And here, with Cornwallis surrounded, the Americans and French would deal the decisive blow. And on October 19th, 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered. It was the nail in Britain's coffin. And from here, the two sides would begin negotiations in Paris, agreeing to part ways on September 3rd, 1783. Benedict Arnold would flee to England, and George Washington would be convinced by his fellow patriots to become the first president of the United States of America, one of the first real republics of the New Age. But not the last, for in France, a smug king laughed, for they had finally gotten one over on their arch-enemies, the British. They had sponsored a revolution against a monarchy, and it worked. It was hilarious, thought Louis XVI. Hilarious because his monarchy would never, ever be exposed to such a ridiculous...
Sir, the peasants are at the palace gates, and they demand your head. Well, then shoo them away. I can smell them from here. My lord, I can hear them. I believe they're inside the house. Viva la Revolution.